Happy Monday, April 1st. This is Book of Hours. We're going live for our weekly broadcast. Typically, I go live every Friday between 10 and 11 to read the next chapter of David Rogers Webb's book called The Great Taking. But being that it was Good Friday last week and we had a huge day ahead of us, it was really difficult for me to go live that day. So we went ahead and rescheduled it for today. So what I want to do is make sure that everything is in working order, make sure that all the channels are streaming okay. And yep, sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead and put on the chat if anybody wants to make a comment. And I just want to I just want to check in with everybody, see how everybody's doing. Did everybody have a good Easter? Did everybody enjoy their day, their weekend yesterday? Before I begin with some of the topics that I want to bring up, I'll tell you about a dish that JP and I make every Easter Sunday. It's called Cuckoo Zabze, and it is a Mediterranean dish that is Persian. And I'll put in the stream here. I'll put I'll share a site with you. I'll share the screen with you so that you can see what it looks like. And Cuckoo Zabze is incredibly green. It's one of the greenest things that you will ever eat. It is called a Persian omelet or a Persian frittata, and that's what it looks like. And we make it every Easter. And one of the reasons we do this is because we just love, the freshness of it. We love the idea that, we're in springtime now. Let me see. The ads are popping up to cover it up. There you go. And so this is what a Cuckoo Zabze is. It's a Mediterranean dish. It's Persian, and it's made with cilantro and dill and parsley and some leeks and a bunch of eggs. And those red things that you see on top are actually sun-dried tomatoes. You can add, to give it a little crunch, you can add some like some almonds maybe, or some kind of nut. We typically don't do that. But this year what we did is we made the Cuckoo Zabze, and because this is our first year in the South Gulf Coast, or in the southern part of the United States where we moved recently, we decided to add a side of grits to it, which was really fun. And we typically drink some Prosecco with it, and it's a very wonderful, filling, and yet satisfying meal. Even though we have incorporated meat back into our life here and there, typically meat off the bone, like turkey or chicken. I eat seafood. Even though we have incorporated meat off the bone, we still follow our vegetarian tradition, which is the Cuckoo Zabze. We were considering maybe getting a ham, which is typical for Easter, but then we were like, nope, let's just stick with tradition and go with this beautiful Persian omelet. You can eat it with pita bread, and you put yogurt or some kind of cultured sour cream on top of it. And those are some radishes on the side. It's really good, and it's very, very healthy. It's very good for you. And there's just the two of us, so there's always leftovers. So I hope that you guys enjoyed your Easter Sunday as much as we did. It was really delicious. And then let me go ahead and take down that screen, get rid of that screen. There we go. So another thing that we did too is we decided to watch a movie called The Dark Knight Rises, which I thought was really interesting. So which I had seen back in 2012. So The Dark Knight Rises is the last film in the Dark Knight trilogy, which Chris Nolan is the one who directed it. Now, Chris Nolan is from San Francisco. I'm partial to his movies. I believe he did Inception. He did the very first Harry Potter film. But one of the things that we really found interesting about The Dark Knight Rises is that it was filmed in Pittsburgh, which was really strange to me because when I saw it in San Francisco when it came out in 2012, I never knew for 1 minute that I would be moving to Pittsburgh 6 years later. We moved to Pittsburgh in 2018. So JP and I were like, wow, we had no idea that it was even filmed in Pittsburgh. And so some of the things that we thought were really interesting in the 2012 film, The Dark Knight Rises, was there was a couple of scenes where we both looked at each other and we said, oh my God, are you kidding me? So there's a scene where Batman says to Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, who is eventually we find out, his name is Robin. So we're supposed to assume that he's going to be the Robin in the future, right? He says to him, you can't just be a vigilante on your own and expose yourself. If you are going to do this, then you need to wear a mask. And the mask, check this out, literally from a quote from The Dark Knight Rises 2012, literally Batman tells Robin, the mask is not to protect you, it's to protect the people you love or care about. In 2012, that is the exact same language that was used in 2020 during the onset of the COVID operation. The talking points through all the commercials, all of the media was the exact same line from The Dark Knight Rises, which is the third movie in the Dark Knight trilogy, the last movie in the trilogy. So it's the exact same line. The mask doesn't protect you, it protects the people that you care about. Isn't that like insane? So they literally took a line from a movie. I'm not talking like a version of the line or a variation of that line. They literally took the exact same quote from Batman and used it to circulate this pro-mask, wear a mask to protect people from, a virus kind of thing. They literally used it to market. They took it to market. They took a line out of The Dark Knight Rises, which is the third movie in the Batman trilogy, an exact line, verbatim, not even a variation of it, and marketed that same line. I mean, I was just appalled. And then, of course, there's the whole, the bad guy takes over what is supposed to represent Gotham, but it's Pittsburgh. They're in Pittsburgh filming, and I just thought it was so strange because I lived in Pittsburgh for a few years, and we just moved like a year ago, and I was like, oh wait, that's Pittsburgh. And JP pointed out UPMC signs. So when the bad guy took over the city, he's standing in front of like the whole city and a big crowd of people, and behind him is a UPMC sign, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and he's basically saying, this is your time. Now that the world is falling apart and all of your heroes I'm killing off all of your heroes and all of the bad guys who have kept you poor for all these, generations or whatever, for all these years, they're all going away. This is your time. This is your time to take back your city. So of course he's, a psychopath, but the fact is that there were some other things that were going on in the film too, which we saw happen in real time 8 years later in 2020. So again, the film was 2012, and 8 years later, we all saw some things happen in real time, which was like for instance, the bridge recently, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, like is disappeared. It's gone. And the bridge in Pittsburgh was blown up in Gotham City, but they filmed it in Pittsburgh. So you know what I'm saying? So it was like there were some other things too, the cops, the anti-cop rhetoric and things like that, and defunding the police, like JP just mentioned. So, it's pretty interesting to me that that all the way back then in 2012, they were starting to field and promote the COVID language. So I wanted to start with that. I hope you enjoyed my photo of the cuckoo's opse that we ate on Easter Sunday. If you're just joining, then you'll have to go back and listen. I've been live for about 10 minutes or more. So, I've already talked about a lot of different things. You can go back and take a look at that from the beginning. But let's see. I want to make sure that we're streaming okay. I know that sometimes we have technical interruptions. Seem to be doing okay. And let's see here. Let me head on over to X-Witter. I am all right. So here we go. Great. Sounds like everything's good. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, as we continue to move through this book, which is The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. So David Rogers Webb has a financial background. All right. And by the way, this is a broadcast, which is audio only. For these, I don't typically go on video. JP and I will probably go on video soon and do a bookmark, which is where we do our own hour and a half. Usually it's once a month or so. And we just talk about, what's going on in the world and kind of bring people back to reality. And so at that point is probably when you'll see us on video. But usually for these weekly broadcasts, I just keep it simple. So that you can do other things. You can go garden, you can do some laundry, you can do your taxes while you're listening to me. That way you're not distracted with too many visuals. So as we continue reading through the book, The Great Taking, David Rogers Webb, like I said, he comes from a financial background. So he's writing this in the context of financial instruments that are used to create this sort of fake idea of collateral. He's basically so far we're headed into chapter. Looks like we're headed into chapter. Sorry, let me get chapter 11, I think. Chapter 8 was the bank holiday. That was a really long one, which we did last week. Okay, so we're actually in chapter 9. So he comes from a financial background. And so some of the things that I've learned so far, which I'll try to, I'll try to analyze this so that it's not so confusing. One of the things I feel that I've taken away from this is that there are certain financial instruments and tools and programs and formulas that are used to, I don't even know if this is a word, but to de-collateralize our lives. So that, for instance, if the mortgage company that we have our mortgage with, if they go bankrupt, then in order for them to pay off the debt to the people that run them, they would have to, our home, even if our home was paid off, would be absorbed in that paying off of their debt. Okay, so nobody really has anything. So this is where you take that term or that phrase, you will own nothing and be happy, and you literally just own nothing. So it feels like the all-American dream, it feels like another takeaway from this book is that the all-American dream of working hard and owning something and being responsible has been inverted. Do all the right things, follow all the rules, save your money, don't get too far into debt, go to school, get a degree, mind your P's and Q's, obey your parents and all that bullshit, right? It feels like the whole thing, in order to attain the American dream, is worthless. Like, I kind of felt like it was worthless anyway. Like, I didn't need like a great reset or a great taking or the whatever to tell me that it was all bullshit anyway. It's really just like who and what sort of, and also what years you were born. JP and I were talking about this recently. It's just like certain people that were born in certain generations just had more opportunities than other people who are born in other generations. And timing is everything, being at the right place at the right time. And sometimes it's just luck and hard. And I've never felt that hard work and being this, demure, obedient woman was going to get me anywhere. Like, I never thought that. So this book sort of confirms, my suspicions anyway, that, that we don't live in a meritocracy, that, it's really just who and timing and, what sort of demographic you were born into. And this idea of this American dream bootstraps bullshit is a brainwashing technique that's been used to make us believe something that isn't even real. So that's one thing that I've learned about reading this book. And another thing I've learned too is the term velocity of money, which I've talked about before. So you can look that up. And also again, I want to go back to this idea of collateral, that there really is no collateral, that there's nothing of yours that is, you don't have any collateral in this system. Like, you don't, according to this book. So it seems pretty dire. It seems pretty dark, but it's actually not. It can also be very freeing. And also, this book is just here to inform us, not here to scare us. It's just what I consider like an information pamphlet. And it's not a very long book. So I think that we should take everything that we're reading and everything that we're absorbing from these financial experts, and we should process them and apply it to our own life, our own personal lives, personal situations as needed. And switching gears a little bit, I want to really just drive home this idea that it's not just a financial great taking. It's been a great taking of everything, a great taking of your mind, your time, your loved ones. It's been a great taking in every sense of the word, like the taking of the very breath out of your lungs. It's just been this massive, overwhelming taking. We just had a bridge taken from us, you know what I'm saying? We've had things taken from us, and it doesn't matter how. The why is kind of important, but really what's more important is the end result. We did a video back a while ago called Social Equity, and we used a 15-minute statement from Rosa Quare, who used to be a land surveyor in California. And she basically said, when she was doing her work for the state of California, she realized that it was sort of a taking, and that there were other agendas at play that were part of her job. And so I guess she quit her job and she started, sort of a grassroots, raising awareness about what this great taking really is. Some people call it Agenda 2030. Some people call it UN Sustainable Goals. Some people call it, whatever. So thank you for saying that, JB. I'm so glad that you liked that video. I'll go ahead and bring it up then. It's called Social Equity, so that people can see it. Just give me a minute to share the screen. It's interesting that you say that it's your favorite video, because it's not very fancy. You know what I mean? It's basically just taking Rosa Quare's statement and let's see, what I'm going to do is share this screen and, putting some visuals to it and a little bit of music maybe. Okay, so JP has a comment. JP, do you want to just come join me? Or so Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers talks about all the computer wonderkins like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were born at the right time in 1958, for instance. If they were born any earlier or any later, they would not have had the same opportunities and would not have been who they became. So this goes back to that comment that I made earlier about how this is how it's just timing. So we've moved on since then. So
it took me a bit to find that actual book.
Oh,
so
okay.
I just wanted to follow up with that idea, and then I'll leave. That there are people that have been brought up or like lifted up in our society, and they're touted as being these wunderkinds or these geniuses or whatever, and all it really is timing.
Right. They didn't start in their garage.
Right.
With a couple of tin cans and some string.
Right.
And then suddenly became like Steve Jobs.
And it's worth looking at that book, because he talks about people, like even kids who they enter school at a certain time based on their birth date, and the kids that are born earlier in the year that they go into school rather than later. So I was born in July, so I ended up not being as advanced mature wise or smart wise as maybe kids that were born maybe a few months earlier. And it makes a big difference, in first, second, third grade. Right. And so he also pointed out in like sports and things like that. So, when you see people lifted up, it isn't a meritocracy, and it never is. It never has been. I think that it has more to do with timing, with luck, with and then just willing to go with the program, right?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
So that's all I wanted to say.
So this is the book that he's talking about. It's called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and you should probably pick it up and read it, or at least find some good Malcolm Gladwell quotes. Now this goes back to that statement that I made about 5-10 minutes ago about how I just put it out there. I didn't mean for it to become like a focus, like a topic, but I basically just put it out there that, as JB said, it's just timing, and then as JP, came in and interjected, it's really even more than just timing. It's literally like, they see what year you were born. And so basically the bottom line is that nothing is, Steve Jobs didn't start in his garage. Neither did Bill Gates. Neither did all these people who we've been told are these, phenoms. You know what I'm saying? They're not that phenomenal. It was just the stars were aligned in their favor. Anyway, so I'm going to get rid of this and go back to social equity. So this right here in the middle of this screen is our video called Social Equity. So as I was saying before we got sidetracked with this timing thing, is that what we're seeing is this sort of equalizing of everything. So, everyone's got to lose people, to death, whether they're murdered or whether it's through the medical industrial complex. You've got to lose your house. You've got to lose, your income. And so this is a pushing down and a compressing of society. So we're all being compressed. And so we're all being equally compressed, even the billionaires, even the people who are, who we would consider untouchable. Everyone's being compressed, everyone's going down. And this is part of, what Quare discovered back when she was doing land survey and land management for the state of California. She realized that this didn't really have anything to do with property rights as she thought it did. It had more to do with, taking people's land away. And then that actually led her to this understanding that it was a much larger goal, which is to take away like life, the essence of life. So if you haven't had a chance to go look at social equity, please go back and look at it. It's from quite a few years ago. It's one of our very first ones that we did. I'll go ahead and get rid of that screen. But there is a term that I want to throw out there for you. And it has to do a little bit with what we're talking about. It has to do a little bit more about, brainwashing. And let me see if I can just throw this out for you. I'll write it in the chat. It's called a luxury belief. Okay. And it's a term that I had always sort of understood, but I just never was able to really even find the term. It was a concept that I understood. That especially if you're on social media a lot, especially if you're influenced by social media, especially if you have influencers in your periphery and all around you, you develop this luxury belief. You develop a belief system that is completely 100% curated by the people who are influencing you, or as I would even go so far as to say they are brainwashing you. And I'm not talking about the New York Times, NPR, CNN, and all the ones that you think are the ones that are brainwashing you. I think you're smart enough to know not to believe them. Nothing that the corporate media or the legacy media says is true. We get that. I'm talking about the people that, are not corporate. I'm talking about your influencers. I'm not even talking about Joe Rogan. I'm talking about people that are even lower than that in your realm, in your social media realm, or just the general zeitgeist of attitude that your connections have through social media. How that becomes a brainwashing technique, which leads you to a luxury belief. You're influenced by the connections that you've made. I noticed that, your sphere of influence. Exactly. Thank you, JP. Again, do you want to come join me? You can totally come join me and help me, articulate a little bit better. I was telling JP that Facebook is like smoking weed. Everybody just sits around and smokes pot in a comfy couch and has some snacks. Nobody, and they've only curated their sphere of influence into people that are just like them. And so their luxury belief systems start to get comfortably embedded into their consciousness. They're all smoking weed. They're all feeling good. It's just like, they put on a little groovy music. They're passing the joint around. They're passing the bong around. They're just like, Facebook is like, is weed. Well, I don't like marijuana. So that's why I don't like Facebook. Okay. And then you've got TikTok, which is basically fentanyl. I wish I would have been the one to call TikTok digital fentanyl, but I wasn't. I have to give the credit to Scott Adams, who calls TikTok digital fentanyl. And then I would say that Twitter, JP calls it Twixter. I call it X-Witter, so X-W-I-T-T-E-R, because I just don't want to call it X. But what is formerly Twitter, or what I call X-Witter, or it's the X platform that uses the Twitter program in order to exist. I would say that it's kind of like maybe like an energy drink, or it's not necessarily bad for you. Maybe it's a little stimulation. Maybe it's like really good coffee, but so if you were to apply, because everything's a drug now on social media, Facebook is a drug. It makes you like lose your mind and you develop luxury beliefs. TikTok is digital fentanyl. It's just disgusting. And Twitter is kind of like this, or X-Twitter or Twixter is just kind of like this, you know, these small bumps of stimulant that you get, and they're and everything that you read on there is interesting and most likely true, because I kind of am part of that crew of people that believe it's, you know, there's, you still have free speech on it. You don't have it on Facebook, you know. So the idea of a luxury belief, though, is I think what has permeated the consciousness of society in general, this idea of a luxury belief. And so I'm going to share a statement from Scott Adams himself, from one of his broadcasts. He broadcasts every single day. I'm going to share a statement, and it's surrounding sort of the Gaza-Israel situation. But I would go so far as to say a luxury belief could be applied to just about anything. So let me find that episode. Let me share that screen. Here he is. And if you're not familiar with Scott Adams, he is the creator of Dilbert. So let me go ahead and just, what I'm going to do is just play what he says and then break it down a little bit, and then I will continue with the next chapter of the book.
Anyway, so the news is saying that Joe Rogan and they say Alex Jones are using the genocide word about the actions in Gaza. Do you think you'll see more of that now that they broke the seal? Well, I think it depends if there's...
I want to interject. Basically what he's saying is that Joe Rogan and Alex Jones came out and said, you know, Israel bad, poor Gaza. And he was like, do you think we'll see more of that because they broke the seal? Because they broke it. And I would argue with him, and I would also remind people that everybody is talking about, you know, how Israel is overdoing it, you know, how they're really going after Gaza and all this stuff. Everybody, even the ladies on The View, the New York Times, NPR, when just a few short years ago, all of those same people were lifting up Israel or saying that, you know, they have a right to protect themselves and all this stuff, right? So they were making excuses for Israel's bad behavior. Well, now, I mean, you've got, like I said, the people on The View, you've got the most mainstream of mainstream legacy media saying Israel has gone too far. All right. So when he says, do you think they broke the seal? I would argue that the seal has already been broken. It's been broken for months. It was broken on my birthday on October 7th, 2023, when the story of the Hamas attacks took place. That's the story. So when the story broke, then all of the storytellers, the people in media who are not ever telling you the truth, picked up the script that they were given, and suddenly Israel bad, when just a few months prior, we had to defend Israel to the death, practically. So I would just argue with Scott Adams that we've already been there. Okay, so let me continue.
Still in business in a month. If Joe Rogan and Alex Jones can say out loud that they believe Gaza is a genocide and they're still in business, then other people might start saying it. Now, I'm not going to give you my opinion on it because this is so subjective and brainwashy and all that. I will simply note this observation. Israel is spending their Holocaust chip. And if it doesn't work out, it's going to be the worst thing in the world. Right? But if they spend their Holocaust trip, I mean, what I mean by that is, at this point, I think it's already fair to say that if you hear anybody from Israel complaining about the Holocaust, It's going to take 2 seconds for you to say, Gaza, right? So they're spending it. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. And I'm not saying that it's not a real thing to spend. It's just that it's one hell of a risky investment. So from an Israeli point of view, it feels like an investment, I think. This is my interpretation. So my interpretation is they had this asset, which is how people feel about protecting Israel because the Holocaust ever happened. But as soon as they do something that other people think reminds them of the Holocaust, that chip goes away. So if they don't get something out of this, it's going to be the biggest disaster of all time. It's a risky move. If I had to guess whether it works, I'm going to guess yes. I think that the hatred of Netanyahu that a lot of people in Israel have right now, because they don't want blood on their hands, I guess, is a luxury belief. You've heard that term, a luxury belief? It's something you can say in public that makes you sound like a good person, but you can only say it because you don't have any control over it. Because if you had control, you wouldn't be saying that shit. So it's a luxury belief, so you can sound like a good person, right? So here's my luxury belief. I think Israel should stop killing innocent people because, I hate any violence. You should stop doing it. Israel should be a good person like me because I say good things in public when I don't have any, I have no skin in the game. So I say good things, peace and love. That's a luxury belief. I suspect there are a lot of anti-Netanyahu people who like being anti-violence, but they kind of need the violence because, Gaza was an existential threat, still is, to Israel. And if they can find a way to get greater control over the area, and again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. There's no opinion here. I'm just saying that if it turns out that things work out, that they manage to create a safer environment that can go forward, and maybe a larger environment. Maybe the size of Israel gets bigger, and that has all kinds of benefits. So it could turn out like the Louisiana Purchase, which, by the way, I'm not a historian. I need a fact check on this. Is it true that Jefferson was criticized for the Louisiana Purchase because it was too expensive? Do I remember that right? It wasn't true that everybody thought it was a good idea, right?
Okay, so he went on to talk about, he compared the Louisiana Purchase to the purchase of, basically the purchase of Gaza. But let's go back to this psychological term or this brainwashing term, this term that comes out of sort of hypnotizing people. So one of the reasons why I pretty much narrowed down the people that I listen to, Dr. Larry Palevsky I listened to, and Scott Adams. Two people. You couldn't ask for two different people, but because Palevsky has such a deep knowledge about children and is a holistic pediatrician, I like to listen to him. And then I also like to listen to Scott Adams. He's a trained hypnotist. So he knows that the media and social media and your sphere of influence is perpetuating luxury beliefs within you. So again, he compared the Louisiana Purchase to, say, sort of, if you whatever you want to call it, the purchase of Gaza, And so JB, who is a connection of mine on Twitter, says, I just don't understand the Gaza-Israel situation other than to think somebody wants that land for a resort area. The only thing I can say is what I know. And what I know is that China now controls the operations and manages the port at Haifa, Israel. And that there has been more interest in moving into and down the region. And it also has to do with building out new canals and all sorts of things. So my theory is that for China's Belt and Road Initiative, which would open up trading, or which would open up the capacity to trade on these waters, that they just want to turn, they just want to manage the port at Gaza, which would be a perfect location to continue their initiatives. Okay, so I don't think it's about a resort. I think it's something much larger. It's about maritime trade, which is one of the most important things in our world right now, which is why the disappearance of the Francis Key Scott Bridge and having that whole port area closed out to that region of our country is so significant. So it has to do with trade. It has to do with, who gets to manage the ports, which will be China. It has to do with what's currently happening in Israel, which is that, Israel and China have great maritime business arrangements and contracts going on. They won the bid to control the port at Haifa. So all this other stuff that people get emotional about, it's a capital that you think that you have, but you don't really have. If you had the money, if you were a gazillionaire and you had the money to throw at Gaza or throw at the Gaza situation, you probably would, but you don't. So you have what's called emotional capital. And this is something that the Great Taking is about. It is stealing your emotional capital for business arrangements that are going on between Israel and China and God knows who else. And of course, the United States wants to be the liaison for these business arrangements. They are all on the same side, probably even, Palestinian leaders. So your emotional capital is being wasted. And it's become a luxury belief. You can afford to show all sorts of sympathy and throw your sympathy around on social media because it makes you look like a good person, just like Scott Adams said. So that's something else that is part of the Great Taking, is this idea that you can have your emotional capital, the things that come naturally to you as a human being, which are empathy and concern for the well-being of others. You don't want to see people being oppressed or murdered outright. And they're applying it to a place that you will never be, a place that you will never know, a place you will never visit, and you don't even know if what you're seeing is true on screen, because everything on screen is a lie, and especially now with AI, right? So I wanted to just bring that up to you as well, and just have you really sit back a minute and go, is what I think a luxury belief? I think that anybody who goes on and on and on about, how terrible it is, how terrible the situation for Gaza is, and all this stuff, and all this murder and oppression and bombing and everything, and Israel bad and this and that. I think they're being led around by their lip. And I think that they're being manipulated. And I think their emotional capital is being wasted, because this is the Great Taking. This isn't about taking your car, your house, your income. It's about taking your emotional capital as well. That's why it's the Great Taking. And that's why he basically, that's why it's the title of the book, The Great Taking, not the taking of your house and only your financial assets. No, the Great Taking. The people you love are being taken from you, whether they're being taken from you outright through the medical, the death medical industrial complex where they die, or whether they're taken from you, whether you have family members that don't even speak to you anymore because of their belief systems are different from yours. So they've been taken from you. This is all about just taking everything from you. So now, I've had everything taken from me in my entire life. And so for me, this whole Great Taking experience was just your average Tuesday. But for most of you out there, it's just been a horrible situation. And so the only thing that you have left is your care and concern for complete strangers that are halfway around the world. that you don't even know if what you're being told is true. So I only go by what I know. And what I know is that China manages the port in Haifa, Israel. I also know that, in Tel Aviv, you've got people dining together that are, from the Arab community and from the Jewish community. You've got, what are these, this garb that women wear from head to toe where they're covered in black. I'm sorry, I should know this, but I don't. So you have these women on their cell phones hanging out at restaurants in Tel Aviv, drinking wine and drinking coffee. Well, the table next to them, you've got people in shorts and t-shirts, that are clearly not of that religious affiliation. So people are just living their lives and mixing it up and doing their thing. So I'm not sure exactly what we're being told is true. And one thing I hate more than anything, more than abuse and more than people stealing from me, is being manipulated. I don't like being manipulated. So I feel that because it's the one thing I hate the most, that it's incumbent upon me to announce to you, that I think that you might be being manipulated into a luxury belief because you can afford it, or you think you can afford it, but you can't really. One last thing that I want to share before I continue with the reading of the book and close this out in about 20 minutes is something that a gentleman by the name of Thomas Hawk announced on Twitter. So here he is. I'll share that. So he sort of encapsulates this ongoing great taking narrative around San Francisco, which is our hometown over here. That's where we grew up. That's where we lived. And then in 2018, we moved to Pittsburgh. And then in 2023, we moved to the Gulf Coast. So I have a keen interest in my hometown, right? Like anybody would. So down here is an early Monday morning picture of San Francisco, which would normally be teeming with people. 6, 7, 8 in the morning. Even that early, it would typically, the San Francisco I know, the streets would just be crowded. And this is pretty much what San Francisco looks like all the time downtown, whether it's the weekend or whether it's, on a Monday, whatever. So I want to read what he says. He says, San Francisco, early Monday morning. Although I get into the office in downtown San Francisco early and it is Monday morning, it's still hard to get over how empty and desolate San Francisco feels downtown. Not a single other person is on the street other than some soul far in the distance wailing and shrieking into the new day. The lights are on, though, and within a few hours, more bodies will trickle into downtown. Still, though, it's a shell of its former glory. So back in the day, you'd hop off the Montgomery BART station and you'd smell the freshly baking cinnamon rolls at Specialties. And now that plaza at the Montgomery Street BART station is completely quiet and empty. Not a single business exists there anymore. Lee's Deli across the street, where you could get a bagel, also closed, along with their cheap lunchtime sandwiches. The Crocker Galleria sits with its large, imposing metal gates locked. There are only 2 merchants left in there. Julie's upstairs and the cupcake place on the ground floor. So I'm familiar with Julie's, obviously. I wonder how long until they close. There used to be 2 different 7-Elevens, an Amazon Go, and a Walgreens within 2 blocks of this photo, and all 4 are now closed, just like the Schwab offices across the street closed, and the Banana Republic, and the Athletica around the corner, as well as the Starbucks up the block. I guess this is what they mean by doom loop. Still, it's a pretty picture in the morning, though. So this is the Great Taking, isn't it? And I would say that the city that was most affected by the Great Taking is San Francisco. And all of those shops have been replaced with cartels. All of those shops have been replaced with open air fentanyl markets. So the shops go away, but a different kind of shopping is now available in downtown San Francisco, all up and down this downtown corridor, and in an area called the Tenderloin as well. And what it is are open air fentanyl markets where people are just, making drug deals. And also where some of the things that people have stolen, they're selling on the street for a lot cheaper. That's your new shopping district in San Francisco. So I wanted to share that with you because obviously I'm appalled by it. I'm outraged by it. Obviously I'm upset by it. JP even said, geez, because I don't think he'd seen that tweet yet. But everything is closed. And so that too is part of the Great Taking, which is why I'm broadcasting today. And I'm not sure if your area or your community has really felt it, has felt the brunt of it in the way that San Francisco has. Okay, so we're going on to chapter 9 of the book, The Great Taking. It's just got a few more chapters left. And this chapter is 6 pages. So we'll try to get through it in the next 10 minutes or so. It's called The Great Deflation. And he starts every chapter, David Rogers Webb starts every chapter of the book with a quote. And this quote is from Aeschylus. Wisdom comes alone through suffering. And boy, I must be really, really smart. Really smart. If wisdom comes alone through suffering, then I must be a goddamn genius. Okay, I went down to the Cleveland Public Library and paged through the old chart books of commodity prices and stocks stretching back into the 19th century. I found that in the 1930s, all commodities, with the sole exception of gold, bottomed at the lows of the prior 60 years. Most public companies ceased to exist. They had gone bankrupt. The shareholders were wiped out. The assets were taken by the secured creditors, the banks selected by the Federal Reserve System. Price levels did not recover for decades. In 1923, Grandpa Rogers, the surgeon who had been in the first U.S. medical unit into the Great War, bought 3 housing lots in Shaker Heights, a new upscale suburb of Cleveland. These properties would have gone up in value through the 20s. In 1929, the stock market crashed. He was probably quite glad that he had not sold the lots and put the money into the stock market. In 1933, when the banks were closed, he was probably quite glad that he had not sold the lots and put the money in the banks. In 1952, 3 decades later, his widow finally sold the lots for 1/3 of what Grandpa Rogers had paid for them in 1923. And this was not because Shaker Heights was economically depressed in 1952. Shaker Heights was in the 1950s and into the early 1960s statistically the wealthiest suburb in the United States. Really? A suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, Ohio being one of the most garbage states in the country, and then Cleveland being one of the armpits of the nation. Shaker Heights, a suburb, was considered the wealthiest suburb in the United States. I don't know. I don't think so. In the 60s? Come on, what about New York? I don't know. In 1905, my great-great-grandfather's coal yard was valued in a bank appraisal at $126,000. A modern industrial building with heavy overhead hoists was built on the property in the 1920s by my grandfather. That became the site of Webb Equipment, the crane and hoist business. After my father's death in 1981, this property with equipment and materials was sold for $80,000. This was after 3/4 of a century. Wow, that's sad. Further confirmation of the persistence of the deflation is found in this paper by Tom Nicholas and Anna Sherbina titled Real Estate Prices During the Roaring 20s and the Great Depression. Using unique data on real estate transactions, we construct nominal and CPI-adjusted hedonic price indices for Manhattan from 1920 to 1939. Hedonic, Hedonic. What does that mean, guys? HED. Sorry, it's a financial term. Of or relating to character. No, that's not right. That's hedonistic. I guess he means hedonic, as in The prioritization of pleasure. Okay. The CPI adjusted index falls during the recession that followed World War I, rises to a local peak in 1926 and declines again following the collapse of the Florida real estate bubble. It subsequently recovers to reach its highest value in late 1929 before falling by 70% at the end of 1932 and hovering around their value until 1939. A typical property bought in the beginning of 1920 would have retained only 41% of its initial value 2 decades later. So I wonder if that's going to happen where things are going to get seriously deflated. So I want to pause there for a minute as we're talking about deflation. One thing that I learned from Scott Adams is, remember when, I don't know if you guys knew this, maybe you guys didn't even know this. So a judge valued Mar-a-Lago, which is worth like, I don't know, like a couple of $1 billion, I think. I don't even know how much it's worth, but I know that it's worth a lot, right? And a judge devalued it at like $800,000. So to me, or something like that, it was some ridiculously low number. So to me, the signal of the judge doing that to Trump's Mar-a-Lago is a tell that everything's getting deflated. So see, it's the Trump show. Like, you can't put any value into anything. You can't, I'm not saying, oh no, poor Trump. And I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is that it's part of the game, right? And so whenever there is something that happens that is notable, something that the media shares or something that we're told is happening, it's not that it's really happening. It's that they're creating a script and a story, but they're letting us know within that script and within that story that this is what we should expect. So when the judge, for one of Trump's many lawsuits, or what we're being told are lawsuits, again, it's a story. The story goes that Trump is under a lot of lawsuits. I don't believe he really is. I don't believe it for 1 minute. Maybe 1 or 2 of them are true, but for the most part, it's a story we're told. It's like entertainment, okay? And so the story goes that a judge devalued Mar-a-Lago, which is worth like, I don't know, $8 billion. And he deflated it to like 800,000 or something like that. That is your signal. That's your tell that this is where it's headed. Like, this is the next phase of the great taking, is the devaluation of your property. Very interesting. So this means, I guess, that it's time to buy if you want to buy. So David Rogers Webb goes on to say, regarding what I just read to you about how real estate prices were deflated during the roaring 20s and the Great Depression, he's like, and this was Manhattan. Consider that in the period from the 1920s and into the 1950s, more than 3 decades, there was little recovery in price level. Think of the absolutely massive demand drivers present through those decades. Electrification and all it enabled, like refrigeration and appliances of all kinds and industrial machinery, the automobile and the associated build out of the highway system, and suburbanization, telecommunications, telephone and radio and television, air travel, and then a global war followed by the Korean War and the Cold War arms race, and population growth. No such drivers of demand are present now. It is quite the opposite. Artificial intelligence and robotics are inherently deflationary. We are told that people are not needed. Perhaps that is a tad deflationary. The inflation we are now seeing is not due to strength in the global economy. The underlying intractable problem of our time is not inflation, but deflation. The inflation is illusory. It is created by massive devaluation of money and artificial scarcity. Consider the implications of the Nord Stream sabotage. And now I would add the implications of the disappearance of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. Perhaps you've heard of the, quote, everything bubble. What is it? I will explain the horror of it simply. Let's take the example of a single bond with no fixed maturity rate, i.e. a perpetuity. The bond pays a fixed annual dividend of $5. If the market rate of interest is 5%, this bond has a value of $100. If the Fed lowers interest rates, such as the market rate of interest for this bond is now only 1%, what happens to the value of the perpetuity? The fixed dividend of $5 remains unchanged. As 5 is 1% of 500, the value of the perpetuity goes up fivefold to $500. Now, if the Fed increases the market rates back to 5%, the value of the perpetuity paying a fixed dividend of $5 returns to $100, and hence there is an 80% decline in value. It's just math. The entire global financial complex is essentially a big perpetuity, i.e. a financial instrument with no fixed maturity date. The prices of all fixed income instruments are determined by interest rates, and all equity market and commercial real estate values are similarly driven. The Fed created the everything bubble with the justification of fighting the global financial crisis, which of course the Fed had also created by lowering the Fed funds rate from 5% to near zero, and then keeping it near zero for most of the past 15 years. The Fed has now increased the Fed funds rate from near zero in April of 2022 to more than 5% in just 1 year. That the decline in global financial and real estate markets will be massive has been made certain. This cake is baked. The financial gains of the past 15 years have been an illusion. Some take comfort in thinking that the losses can be hedged in the derivatives market. If that's the case, the losses do not appear. They're in the derivatives complex. Epic losses will be concentrated on the balance sheets of the CCPs, which we have seen are designed to fail. CCP, he mentions a lot. It is a financial term. It is not Chinese Communist Party. So it stands for let's see, CCP, sorry. Central Counterparty Clearing House. It is a clearinghouse, performs two primary functions as the intermediary in a transaction, clearing and settlement. As counterparties to the buyers and the sellers, CCPs, or central counterparty clearinghouses, guarantee the terms of a trade, even if one party defaults on the agreement. Okay, I just wanted to clear that up. Every time he uses the term CCP, because you guys have been brainwashed, you immediately go to Chinese Communist Party. So I'm also trying to break your brainwashing. So I always throw out terms that I've learned over the last few years, and luxury belief is one of them. So I suggest that you go and look at luxury belief and then apply it towards your sphere of influence. That the decline in global financial and real estate markets will be massive has been made certain. This cake is baked. They are in the derivatives complex. Epic losses will be concentrated on the balance sheet of the CCPs, which, as we have seen, are designed to fail. Some take comfort in saying that the Fed will lower rates again when they are forced to do so. Have you noticed that they are not lowering rates despite the first bank failures? This is just the beginning of such failures given the basic math explained above. The Fed is sharply increasing rates into economic weakness and a banking crisis. This is exactly what was done in the Great Depression, and they are doing this with the bizarre and cruel justification of fighting wage growth. When the everything bubble is imploded, we will face a deflationary depression which will span many years or even decades. This coming Great Deflation is intrinsic to the Great Taking. Let's go back up to the one sentence you said. They're doing this with the bizarre and cruel justification of fighting wage growth. Thank God somebody is saying that, because there is no reason why our minimum wage can't go up to $25 an hour. There is just no justifiable reason. There isn't. And all these people who say, oh, well, businesses will go out of business, they'll have to close down if they have to pay their employees a living wage. Oh, for fuck's sake. That is just not true. And this guy is the expert on it all. And he's even coming out and saying there is no justification for fighting wage growth. The architects of the Great Taking have planned and prepared to use this dynamic fully, secure in their knowledge that as night follows day, massive and prolonged deflation will certainly follow the epic debt expansion supercycle, which they created. The architects have assured that they alone are positioned to take everything, and that you and your children are positioned on the other side of that, i.e., to lose everything, to be enslaved and even destroyed by it. People will be knocked down and not be able to get up again. That is intentional, as the populace has been systematically encouraged to go deeply into debt. When the gods would destroy, they first caused to borrow at low rates of interest. So one of the things that many of you may know or you may not know is that when we left San Francisco, we had no money, we had no job, we had no income, and we were basically facing homelessness. So we took whatever little bit of cash that we had, and we moved to the hood in Pittsburgh. And we bought a 100-year-old house that we owned outright. We didn't get on a mortgage. We bought it for the price of a used car. I'm not kidding. And we lived in poverty. So gunfire, our neighbors had, ankle monitors. But one of the things that we noticed about the neighborhood that we lived in was that it was generationally poor. Systems were set in place to keep the people poor. If you want to know what's going to happen to you and you want to know what's going to happen to your country and where you live, then I suggest you go hang out in McKees Rocks for a week. Go walk around the dilapidated streets, the blight, the rubbled out sidewalks, all of the people that are just poor. It feels kind of oppressive and bad. And there's one or two good things there that are holding that community up, but not very many. That's what's going to happen, where it becomes a generational thing. So the children grow up with this idea that they were poor, grandma was poor, mom was poor, grandma was poor, grandpa was poor, aunts and uncles are poor, and so that they're poor. And that's a life that they have become used to and so accustomed to that it becomes their inheritance. Poverty and degradation and ugly things and terrible things are part of their inheritance. So it sounds like it's basically when he talks about this great deflation in this chapter, which I think is my favorite chapter, is that he basically is describing McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. He's basically describing any of these hollowed out communities that you can't even get your streets fixed. You can't even get your sidewalks fixed. And there's no jobs. Everybody has to be, on some sort of assistance. And so it sounds like that's what the future holds. As in the Great Depression, prolonged deflation will assure that people who are in debt will not be able to make payments on their debts, let alone repay them. They will be trapped. All property and business financed with debt will be taken. With profound and persistent deflation assured to stretch over many years, debt becomes a powerful weapon of conquest. Debt is not a real thing. It is an invention, a construct designed to take real things. It is instructive to look at the deeper meaning of the word debt. The root word is believed by etymologists to be an ancient Proto-Indo-European word, gab, meaning to give or to hold or to receive. It is found in the Sanskrit gabasti, hand or forearm, and the Latin habere, to have, to hold, to possess, the Old English geffen, and the Old Norse geffa, to give. And in the present-day Swedish, ger. However, the Latin prefix de, meaning to do the opposite or undo or take away totally and completely, think of the word defrost, utterly negates this giving or this having or this holding. According to the online etymology dictionary, the Latin word debere means to owe. Originally, keep something away from someone, or de, away. habere, to have. In medieval Latin, the meaning of habere was, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing these right, sorry, I never took Latin, forgive me, was goods, capital, and investment. The bottom line is that debt has for centuries had the function of dispossessing, of taking away property, capital, and investments from someone. We can plainly see in their deliberate preparations over decades to take on a vast scale that there will be no debt forgiveness. Ancient societies knew the practice of the debt jubilee, i.e., a comprehensive forgiveness of debts. It was enacted repeatedly in the interest of general human welfare. No debt forgiveness is intended now. But what purpose should the artificial constructs and institutions of society serve if not human welfare? What must vitally concern each and all of us if not human welfare? The powers that be have designed an elaborate legal construct to prevent individual states from directing their central banks to create the money to protect the depositors. If many trillions can be created to bail out private banks, the same could certainly be done to bail out the depositors as a social imperative. That it will not be done is a sign of the true intent: deprivation and subjugation. The Great Reset is anti-human. It is intended to fix in place a system, something like feudalism in perpetuity, in which the populace is held in a state of deprivation and fear with the empty promise of safety. Well, wake up. We've been living within a protection racket in which the protectors terrorize the protected. Those supposedly protecting us from the bad guys are the bad guys. Okay, so far, that was my favorite chapter. It was very well written, easy to understand. And it's also very I feel vindicated. I feel what's the word when you feel good about your opinion about something, and someone else who's got a lot more knowledge than you comes along and verifies it. I feel justified, because we have been saying from the very beginning, even before like the COVID operation, it's about debt. Debt. It's literally about debt. And we've seen it with our own two eyes. We lived in a community where people were just, totally oppressed. And the collateral validated. Yeah, vindicated. Thank you. I feel vindicated, validated, because we've been saying that all along. But the people in the community of poverty that we moved out of, they didn't have any money, and so they weren't necessarily in debt, but their time and their energy and their very life force was used as collateral to help pay for their Section 8 housing, give them food stamps. The circles that they had to run around to live a life, running around in circles to please a thing or do a thing or sign a form or be a place or keep a meeting or meet with a caseworker or meet with their parole officer, all this bullshit, that's considered debt. That's debt of your time. That's debt that's taking away. It's like, if you don't give up, your autonomy or your life for these things, then you can't have a life. You know what I'm saying? So debt is not just a financial instrument. It can also be used to bleed you of your life force, just living. These people don't ever have time to just enjoy life or relax, or have anything good, So what's the answer? Well, the answer is to squirrel away a little bit of cash. The answer is to develop a trade, have a diverse portfolio. That's a really corporate way of saying develop some skills and be able to, pull from whatever skill sets you have. If you're a really good gardener, then make up gardening business. If you're a really good contractor and you can fix homes really well, then do that. Have something something really practical and really useful. If you know how to grow food really well, grow food, but not because, oh my God, it's the end of the world, and oh my God, we're all going to die. But because it's just good to have anyway. Like, just do it anyway. Get off social media, stop living in your luxury beliefs and wasting your creative capital, so, and relax, like our good friend said, who actually donated this book to us, which I really, really appreciate. Relax, don't let the scaremongering and the doom and gloom of what you see, especially on social media, really get to you. Let your mind go a little bit, let your body relax, and the answers will come. So anyway, I will see you guys probably this Friday. Usually we go live every Friday, but because it was Good Friday last Friday, I didn't, and I decided to reschedule it for today. So I'm really, really glad that you guys joined me today. It's over an hour now, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off, but tune in this Friday for the next chapter of The Great Taking, which is conclusion, chapter 10. So it looks like we've reach the end of the book as of next week. And then, of course, it's a long appendix. There's a lot of sources that he lists. But so we will end the reading of The Great Taking next week with chapter 10. And then I think what I'm going to do is another friend donated a book to us, and I'm sure you've all heard of it. It's called The End of America. It's written by Naomi Wolf, and I think I will start reading that after next week. So we'll just keep moving on with our weekly readings, and there will always be interesting things to read, right? Okay, guys, thanks for checking in today, and I'll see you on Friday, or I'll speak to you on Friday. Bye.